Hey sculptors, welcome back to the studio. So we're kind of at a point where we've tapered out all of the limbs in class, and in the previous tutorial we sort of covered how to follow along with the anatomical guide using a caliper and using sort of some measurements to make sure that the top of the leg tapers more or less continuously down to a fairly thin ankle, and not just trusting your eye, but like really using the caliper measuring tool to make comparison measurements. It's really easy to sort of get sort of tricked into believing it's one way or the other, and the caliper sort of checks your own bad vision. I find myself constantly making measurements mistakes, and so I reach over and take measurements right off the chart. And but basically the same thing goes for the arms. Instead of including the arms in another tutorial, I figured we'll just sort of use the same basic idea and then work on it in class, and you can get some feedback on it in class. And then not being afraid, sort of as you're building it out, to if you overbuild, which is really easy to do if if all we've really been focused on is adding, is using the fettling knife. Come back in and sort of shave off areas. Like in the piece I've been doing in the tutorials, I've really probably overbuilt the top chest and shoulders, and I've sort of underbuilt other areas, and so I could come back in and shave and flatten and remove that clay. It comes off really nicely, really easily with the blade. And then also to be careful as you're removing or as you're thinning, that if you over thin and expose the armature, that you're careful to then cover that back up. For this piece, we're not going to have an exposed support or an exposed armature. Think about that. Think about how how we've really kind of done our best to sort of flesh this thing out in the classical style, and what an exposed armature would do in that sense. So be careful to remove any excess wire that you need. So say you need to come in and really thin out an ankle or something, make sure you nip off any of those areas, or in a wrist, nip off any of that extra winding so that you don't run into that issue. I ran into the issue on the piece that I had in school, and so in a couple of areas it gets a little thin and the aluminum pokes out, and so it's good to sort of be able to predict where that kind of stuff might happen and then bury that in it so that it's kind of internalized in the clay. But we're so far along in the sculpture at this point, you very likely wouldn't be able to go back and tweak the armature. And so, in this case, because I had 3 different models all working at the same time for different reasons, it's useful to be able to come back to an armature and say, tweak an armature the way that I would have or could have or should have built it in the first place. So kind of think about that in the future, right? Like if you're going to rebuild an armature, where might you avoid those mistakes? So in today's tutorial, we're going to actually focus on what may feel a little bit sort of like a finishing move, adding sort of a neck and shoulders or a head and shoulders, build it on sort of a pyramid of muscle on either side of the neck, the trapezius muscles, and then build out a basic head form. And then we're going to pretty much pause on these pieces. We're not going to take them so far that we sort of reach sort of finished contouring, but what I would like for you to be able to do is sort of eyeball down the sort of skin level surface, and just sort of run your eye down the length of your piece, and if it more or less matches the sort of simplistic anatomical drawings, we don't necessarily have to bring them up to full realism. I think that these might be really great pieces to come back to for your final projects, and possibly bring them up to more a little bit higher level of realism for a final exam project. But for today, we're going to start building in, whether we're ready for it or not, start building in sort of foundation of the neck and the head. And for that, I've got a few more Jan Barcet drawings to sort of help reference what muscle groups we're referring to when I say the sort of trapezius pyramid, or the sort of, we'll kind of build from the pit of the neck up. It's nice to be able to kind of take a look at some of the bone structures and the muscle structures and see what's going on. So if you need those references, they're available to you. And then today we'll also start with a bit of drawing on our anatomical drawing here, just to kind of prepare for what the clay is up to. So let's get our clay warmed up and do a bit of drawing first. So let's do just a bit of drawing in the sort of foundation of the neck and the sort of skull structure or the head structure here, so that we can get a sense for what we'll be focusing on. What I want you to take a look at on your character, primarily probably from the back in the front, is this sort of pyramid-like foundation the trap muscles, or the trapezius muscles, the neck muscles form, that sort of give a platform to build up the neck. If our neck essentially right now has a bit of a pit where the shoulders come up, come down to where the clavicles have sort of left us with a bit of a hollow, what we'll end up doing is sort of building up a triangular platform, and then up from the triangular platform will be the sort of neck post, right? And that'll be the sort of support structure. And then we'll pay really careful attention to sort of spherical nature, especially to the back of the skull. And so having a couple of these sort of roughed in drawings will be useful references. I think a side view as well is fairly useful. Generally, we've got this sort of two ovaloid or maybe an oval circle shape going on, where we have a circular sort of skull ball, especially toward the back, and then a little bit more of a rounded or oval shape that sort of joins that skull. But I feel like this, I think this sort of basic arrangement of the skull is good to learn, and then from there we do some modifications. And then here we go again with the sort of base, sort of the platform or the post of the neck, and you can see just a little bit of the trap sort of pyramid underneath the neck here. These are useful sort of fill-in, sort of sculptural fill-ins to have. They're going to be sort of simple shorthand, sculptural shorthand for the head, neck, and some of maybe simplistic facial features that we'll use in our character. So as you're getting set up to do your clay work again, get your clay supported up underneath. Probably a good idea to get it back up at eye level if possible. And I'm going to, I'll end up working one of these in the tutorial and one of them in the studio again. And essentially what we're going to be, building off of here is the sort of the pit of the neck. We're going to come up with a triangular sort of trapezius, or like the kind of the pyramid base of the neck. Give the neck a post and sort of build the head from the inside out. And then we'll stop at about the sort of level of resolution here and call it for this project, at least for now. And so, while I'll save one of these for the in-studio work, we'll build out this guy here, even though he's got a few more proportional issues than the other piece. What I'm going to start with is that sort of reference line from the original Rodin reference that sort of pitches the head forward. I want to make sure that I'm building the head in reference to my two sculptural reference points here, and I'll begin with essentially massing in the pyramid. And because there's no armature that sort of travels up into the neck, I have to sort of keep drawing this line in and make sure that I'm building out the neck and the trapezius muscles symmetrically as they kind of come from the pit of the neck straight up. And then as you're building any appendage, whether you're working on torsos or now we're here working on the neck, it's a good idea to keep this sculpture rotating. Remember, you're working in the round, and in general I like to think of a simplified angle, right? I've hopefully squared the pelvis of my armature to one edge of my block, so turning my block 90 degrees each turn sort of helps me view my subject, even though my subject is twisting, helps me view my subject from only 4 angles. That dramatically simplifies the number of potential, reference photographs I might need. And I know that it's possible that I'm missing information and all that, but in terms of like learning to sculpt the human form, keeping it maybe down to 4 reference points is a good idea. There's plenty going on at those 4 reference points to keep us busy before we get too complicated with our forms. So I am going to use my same anatomical reference here to take my neck measurements as I build up the platform, or maybe the post of the neck is what we'll call it. and I'll be using some of the anatomical reference drawings here to make sure that I'm laying in muscles that that follow, or laying in clay that sort of follow the muscular sort of build, or follow the muscular flow that's going on under the surface. I find some of these drawings to be really handy in that I can actually see not only the direction of the muscles, but where they're attaching and flowing. So if it's just kind of confusing to you where where some of these forms are coming from and how they're undulating, take a close look at these drawings and spend a little time considering where those build, where these muscles build up from before you add your clay, before you add your first bits of clay to the neck. Okay, so I still have a bit more massing to do in the head, but after 15-20 minutes or so, I've got the rough sort of platform, the trapezius platform built up. I've got the post of the neck. I've even sort of got the head massed into some approximately where it needs to be. I have the sort of ball of the skull close. It's a little undersized yet, and then and that sort of forward-facing oval with the ridge of the nose. The last thing that I think I'll do here before we call this studio session quits is I want to remark sort of this flowing line, this S sort of curve that flows through the line. And what I'm essentially doing is trying to map out where I would like the center line of the head to sort of be, and then also how I want the neck to follow a similar alignment front to back of that S curve. This was sort of the central idea behind using a classical pose, a contrapposto pose, is that you should be able to trace a nice sort of curving line through the whole form. That curving line is sort of in a relationship to the sort of line of sort of obedience, or like where gravity is really working on our subject. And then I'll actually finish up with some of my other markings because I've got plenty of other work to do, sort of thinning and removing areas, adding and massing other areas to match up to scale. But from here on out, guys, we've got all of the features kind of blocked in, and it's just a matter of sort of bringing them up to a certain level of realism that we're comfortable with. I look forward to catching up with you guys in the studio and helping you kind of bring these things towards their final stages. Catch up with you in school, guys.